I think we can get started. This is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Building an Estimation Center of Excellence. Before we begin, I'd like to make you all aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the conference call are currently on mute. So to ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog box on the right-hand side of your WebEx screen. And Larry will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. But if he doesn't get to your question, don't worry, we'll provide contact information at the end of the presentation. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to contact us and we'll follow up with you. So I'll start by quickly introducing our presenter today, Larry Putnam Jr. As co-CEO of QSM, Larry has 25 years of experience using the Putnam SLIM methodology. He has participated in hundreds of benchmarking, estimation, and oversight service engagements. Larry has delivered numerous speeches at conferences on software estimation and measurement, and he has trained more than 1,000 software professionals on industry best practice measurement, estimation, and control techniques in the use of QSM SLIM Suite. Larry is currently responsible for the management of QSM's business development, research, and customer care programs. So without further delay, I'll let Larry get started.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everyone. As Elizabeth said, today we'll be talking about building an enterprise estimation, I like to say measurement and estimation center of excellence, or COE. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be exploring a number of topics. The first thing is, why do we want to do this? What's the value proposition of trying to set up a formal estimation center of excellence at the enterprise level? And then we'll go into a number of the key process areas of actually doing that. So, defining a business case. This is building the value, and the ROI of why we should be making an investment in doing this in the first place, and then documenting that in some sort of a COE charter. And then we'll talk about the estimation process definition within the organization. So how do we tailor the estimation processes so it fits the organization with the different types of things that they're doing with respect to software. And then I think it's important that we integrate the estimation processes in with some of the other infrastructure and reporting processes that are already in place in the organization. And then we'll talk about deploying it. So how do you roll it out and deploy it? And then obviously, as with any other set of processes, we need to have some feedback loops and accommodate continuous improvement as we move forward and we develop lessons learned that we want to incorporate in. And then we'll finish up at the end to try and show you some real benefits, some real clients that have actually done this. Why did they go about doing it? What were some of the issues that they encountered? What did they put in place, and then what were some of the benefits that they got out of it? So that's kind of what we'll finish up with, and then I'll transition it over to Elizabeth, and we'll go into some questions and answers. So why would we want to set up something like this, a more formalized, estimation center of excellence in the organization? For a lot of reasons. Obviously software is in almost everything that we do these days, and we just keep getting bigger and bigger demands from our customers wanting more and more capabilities. So, and we're having to do that with, within an environment where we're always being asked to do more things with either fixed or fewer resources. And can you give it to me faster? So a lot of demands on the development organization. Competition is big. A lot of players that we're having to compete with out there. Time to market expectations. Got to get this out there as fast as possible. Again, from a competitive standpoint, and also from a customer expectation standpoint. And it reflects on our organization and our reputation on being able to deliver on these commitments. Now, it's been our experience in being in this business for the last 30 years that most of the failure to deliver relates to being able to deliver on expectations as opposed to our capability as a development organization. So we need some ways that we can manage those expectations and make better business decisions. And the earlier we can push, estimation into the process to help us with those decisions, the better off we're going to be. So generally, it's not an execution issue. It's an issue about making commitments and managing expectations. All right. So what are some of the key areas that go into setting up an estimation center of excellence? Well, there's the first couple things, the business case and the charter. These are basically about establishing a sound foundation on why we want to do this, the value of doing it, the business case, and then documenting it. And then we get into more of our estimation process definition. So we've got to apply these processes, estimation processes, to everything that we're doing within the scope of the COE and what it's going to be supporting within the organization. So we might have different software development methodologies that we're using. We've got to make this estimation process so it fits whether we're doing more sequential waterfall types of projects, legacy applications, and maybe we've got some newer lean methodologies and agile that we're bringing in. So we have to be able to adapt these processes to the different types of methodologies that we're using. And we also obviously are going to have to configure our estimation tools, whatever those happen to be, so that they will support those different types of development methodologies. As I said earlier, we want to integrate this with the existing infrastructure that's in place. We're going to have to put in place, certain standards on how we're going to apply estimation and how we're going to, define certain things within the organization. We'll look at the different enterprise systems that are already in place, and we'll want to target which one of those do we want to formally integrate the estimation processes into, such as project and portfolio management, requirements management. From the development standpoint, it might be some of our CM and testing tools and processes. So once we've got that sort of defined and implemented, then we're going to roll it out. So usually you've got some sort of preliminary rollout. I call it a pilot. We've got to educate everybody in the organization and create awareness of why we're doing this and why it's important. And there'll be quite a bit of process tooling and education that goes on. And there'll be a couple different groups that we'll have to deal with. We're going to have the Center of Excellence staff, or our experts, that we're going to have to train up. But then we've got the rest of the stakeholders in the organizations. Think of those as more of the casual users of the processes. And then again, we have to provide a feedback and continuous improvement loop so that we can make this better as we go forward. So those are kind of the 6 major process areas about standing up a measurement and estimation center of excellence. So from a business case standpoint, what's involved here? This is really about getting endorsement from the executive management, getting their buy-in that this is important and that they're going to support it. It's going to require an investment, both to stand it up and to operate it, and they're going to have to improve that investment. And we'll have to show that there's a justification for the investment that we're going to make. So one of the first things that we'll do is we'll want to get a quantitative benchmark in place of the organization. Okay, and that's going to be sort of our baseline that we're going to use for looking at what are we doing right now, and what is our current performance capability, and then where are some opportunities for improvement or things that we're doing well that we want to continue to propagate across the organization. So we'll have our current state supported by the quantitative benchmark. And then we'll be able to take the improvement analysis that comes out of that to extrapolate what is the future state, where do we want to be if we implement those recommendations, and what are the benefits and, in fact, maybe the savings that we'll derive from getting to that future state, and that feeds into the return on investment analysis, money in versus savings on the back end, what are we likely to get out of it. So really coming out of the business case, we've got a decision point, and it's either going to move forward justified by the business case or it's not. So what do we mean by senior management support? And because it's absolutely critical to the success of standing this up. Well, we mean financial support. So they're going to have to, invest and provide a budget for doing this. They're also going to have to provide for staffing the COE with qualified resources, and I've sort of highlighted that, and I'm going to circle back in a couple slides and talk to what do we mean by qualified. What's the required skill set that these folks should have to successfully bring this off. They're going to need to provide deployment support. So what does that mean? It means, mandatory use. Okay, things like, no project funding unless the projects go through the estimation process. They're going to need to support the data collection. So, as a regular part of our project closeout activities, we're going to collect the historic data on what actually happened and use that as the basis for supporting our future productivity assumptions and bearing out whether we're getting the benefits that were laid out in the business case. And they'll generally need to support and mandate that this gets integrated into the other enterprise portfolio, project management, or QA processes. They also need to set goals for the deployment and enforce accountability. So they need to require that there's a deployment schedule, and that schedule should include key milestones that we can assess progress against. Some of the clients that have rolled this out, those milestones are related to different groups within the organization that they're rolling out the estimation processes to. And as they successfully roll it out to a group, that'll be a milestone that they'll check off until all the groups are fully deployed. They also, it's useful if we can tie the Center of Excellence staff, if we can tie incentives to meeting those goals. In other words, things like bonuses for successfully meeting all of their deployment criteria during the quarter, during the year, or semi-annually, however we want to set that up. And then senior management should require regular progress reviews. So that says that they're interested in how things are going along, and it helps enforce the accountability of getting the rollout and keeping it on track. So that's kind of what we mean by senior management support. When we talk about the investment that's going to have to be made in the COE, what are we talking about? Well, we're going to have to staff it, and generally the resources are going to be tied to either the size of the enterprise or the scope of the deployment within the enterprise. In other words, are we just going to deploy this across a division, or are we going to try and do this across the global enterprise, everybody? So, a small to medium-sized enterprise, you might need 1 to 5 people to staff up a center of excellence. If we're talking about a large global corporation, you might be in the 5 to 25 person range. And the more that we're supporting, different geographies, it's useful to have people, locally in that geography that speak the language and things like that. But that's generally what we're talking about from staffing, the investment in people to staff up a COE. We're going to have to invest in measurement and estimation training and education. So we'll have to train up the COE staff. We'll need to train up the rest of the organizational business stakeholders, and we'll have to provide some ongoing mentoring, as they're deploying across the organization in long term. And then obviously there's got to be some automation and tooling that supports this. There might be different tooling depending on whether we're talking about the COE staff. These are our back office estimation experts, our power users, versus the rest of the stakeholders that might be only involved occasionally, maybe at regular decision points. But again, we're going to have to support them with tools. So it's people, education, and tooling that we're going to be making an investment in. So I mentioned earlier, there's a certain set of skills that we'd like our Center of Excellence staff to have. They need to have some basic development skills. Now, by that I don't mean they have to be able to program and develop systems, but they do need an understanding of the development process that goes on. So how we define the requirements, how those then get implemented in whatever the technology is that we're implementing it, and how that gets integrated together and tested out and delivered at some required reliability. So they need to understand the development process because they're going to be interacting with development people, and they've got to talk their language. They're going to have some analytical skills, so they got to be comfortable working with data, understanding basic, business statistics, looking at variability in data, doing regression fits, things of that nature is very common in this measurement and estimation arena. They've got to have communication skills, both in gathering the information they need to do their analysis, and they're usually communicating with, maybe technical folks, but then also in presenting the results of their analysis. And, they've got to have presentation skills, which is how do they package up the relevant information into a digestible product based on who they're presenting to. And that's usually going to be in some form of a report or a briefing. And then mediation and conflict resolution skills. We're in this game, we're not always delivering good news. In many cases, we're telling people you can't deliver all of that capability that the customer wants within the fixed timeline and within the fixed budget that the customer has. So we need our COE staff to be able to evaluate and negotiate viable alternatives. Okay. Planning and execution skills, obviously, that's keeping things on track, and then, mentoring skills, because they're really going to support the broader enterprise customers of the COE. So that's, the project managers, the business stakeholders, or the business people, and the senior management that we're going to have to go back to regularly to, keep the investment going and getting their support. So that's the sort of basic skill mix that we would like our Center of Excellence staff to have. All right, we talked about as part of the business case, we want to start that off with a benchmark. Okay, so why do we need to go through a benchmarking exercise? Well, it really provides the basis against which we're going to measure our future improvements, and we're going to quantify those in terms of cost savings, schedule improvement, quality improvement, productivity improvement. Going through the benchmarking exercise, what we'll find is we'll see that there are certain projects that will be outliers. And if they're outliers in a good sense, then we're looking at why they perform so well. And those are things that we want to emulate and propagate across the organization. We'll also find there'll be outliers on the not so good side, and we'll want to try and understand what were the reasons for that. And those are opportunities for process improvement. So a lot of times the recommendations on the future state that we'd like to be in is how do we address some of these areas for improvement, and what are the benefits that we're likely to get if we actually do that. You can also use benchmarking to assess your internal and external competitive position. And I'll tie this back to the third slide where we said most of the problems with delivering on commitments is not delivery problems. So the first time usually we come in and benchmark an organization, the development folks are going to be very apprehensive about that because their knee-jerk reaction is we're not going to look so good, because we never can meet our schedules and we're always over budget. And then when you actually present the results, you find out in many cases they look reasonable or maybe even some cases good when compared with other people in their same industry. And it helps shine a light on the problem is not in the performance area, it's in setting the expectations, okay? So they then swing around and become big supporters of this after the initial apprehension of going through the benchmark. If we have suppliers, it gives us the ability to negotiate with our suppliers and be able to compare the bids that we're getting, with empirical performance to make sure we're getting good value for the money that we're spending. And it's absolutely critical to supporting realistic estimation processes. So that's why we want to do it. It has a number of benefits for us, and it provides the basis for figuring out, where we are right now, the as-is state, and then if we make some recommendations and act on those recommendations, what is the likely to-be state, and then we quantify the benefits in terms of these are the likely cost reductions across a portfolio of this size, the quality improvements, the schedule improvements, and the productivity improvements, and then we put that into a return on investment. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the details of the mechanics of how you do the benchmark. We actually did a webinar not too long ago. The replay is up on our website. It's called Using Benchmarking to Quantify the Benefits of Process Improvement. So I'd encourage you, if you want to see more of the mechanics of how this is done, there's a whole webinar that you can go watch on how to do that. And in fact, I think when we finish up here, Elizabeth's going to have a landing page with a link right to it. So if you're interested in that, please go take a look at that. When we're talking about benchmarking, we're talking about collecting some data and some metrics. So, I thought I'd put this slide up. This is the core metrics that we want to, the core quantitative metrics that we want to try and capture as part of our benchmarking exercise. So we need something, some metrics that determine size and scope of what is it that we delivered. And there's no one size metric. There's a whole list of size metrics. A lot of times the ones that we use are dependent on either where we are in the project. The earlier we are in a project, the more abstract and high level the size measures are. And it also is maybe tied to the type of development methodology that we're using. But basically what it tells you is the size of the overall system, either historically of what we delivered, or if I'm looking into the future of what we're trying to implement. And if you look at a lot of the industry data like we have, it turns out that there's a very direct correlation between the size of the system and how long they take and how much they're going to cost and even how many defects we're going to generate. And it turns out that it's a very nonlinear relationship. So it's very important to be able to nail down size and scope on the projects that we're doing. Okay, and then the other thing is, if we're measuring it along the way, it tells us how much of the product do we have, built at any particular point in time. Schedule and cost, or schedule and effort, here we're measuring the duration, the overall duration of the project, or if we're somewhere in the middle of the project, we're using things like key tasks or milestones to tell us how much of the schedule we've consumed so far. Effort is just going to be our labor, our staffing over that timeline. It's proportional to cost by whatever the labor rates are. And then, it's basically telling us how we're spending the money. And then the final metric, quantitative metric, are going to be defects. So this is kind of looking at how stable the product is at any point in time. We can look at defects broken out by different severity categories, and it's useful if we're monitoring it along the way, because then we can see how many defects are we finding at whatever stage we're in on the project, and we can then project out when will the product be stable enough that we can deploy it and put it into production. So those are basically your core quantitative metrics. And then going along with that, there's some qualitative information it will capture as well. So the demographics, application type, complexity, development classification, what industry sector the software supported, technology that was used. And then we've got 3 broad categories where we'll capture some information on tools and methods that are used, the technical complexity of the software, and then a sort of a profile of the team, of their skills, their experience, and with the application and motivation and things like that. And this is the information that we'll use when we're looking at the positioning of the quantitative data. Again, when we see outliers, good or bad, this is where we'll home in to try and use this as a diagnosis of why did that project position the way that it did, and then this is, in many cases, where our recommendations are coming out of. Okay, so the second step is we want to document all of those things that went into the business case in the Center of Excellence charter. Okay, so it provides clarity and direction and purpose of what we're trying to do, which includes defining the guiding mandates and incentives of doing this, clarify who the sponsors and the champions are, the stakeholder roles, because everybody's going to have a role in this. What are the key deployment milestones, and what are some of the key decision points that the Estimation Center of Excellence is going to support? Formulate what the measurement of this, and the success criteria is going to be, and it establishes the communication protocols among the different stakeholders. And most importantly, it's going to confirm the buy-in from senior management. That's so critical to continuing the Center of Excellence and making it successful. Okay, so step 3 is really about acquiring a deep understanding of our development process. We've probably got a lot of different things going on at the enterprise level. So like I said, what are the different types of development life cycles or methodologies that we're employing? What are the different types of software that we're going to apply this to? So, we might have some package implementations, SAP and Oracle, that we want to do, where they might have a different life cycle and different sizing metrics that we've got to deal with. We might have a lot of business or IT projects that we're doing, and in some cases we might have different, more complex engineering or maybe real-time types of software. So what is it that we're applying it to, and then defining the decision-making process. Who's going to make the decisions, what are those decisions, and when are they going to be made? And that's going to relate to governance and decision points. So, where are we going to, where are the estimation points within the organization, and what decisions, is the estimation process going to support? And then, what artifacts are available at those estimation points that are going to drive some of our key inputs to the estimation process: size and scope, productivity, and resources and availability. Okay. So, if we think of different product development or software development methodologies, from a very high level, you can describe all of the ones I've encountered in 4 basic activities. And those are: what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? We do it, and then we deploy, and sometimes we fix things up. Okay? That generally describes how humans solve a design process, and it applies to software as well. Now, you will notice that different methodologies may have those things more sequentially, where we're going to do this before we do the next activity and the next, and there's others that tend to have more concurrency between the what, how, do, and fix. And if we took, a couple of examples, in waterfall, we might think of the what as, concept definition or feasibility study. The how might be, requirements and high-level design. The doing it part is building it, constructing it, and testing it. And then the deploy is what it sounds like. It's actually implementing and deploying the software across the enterprise. If we were using something more like a rational unified process, they call those things initiation, elaboration, construction, and transition. If I was using an agile or a lean or Scrum-based methodology, we might have initiation, iteration planning, iteration development as the doing it, and then production as the deployment stage. And then another, maybe if we were doing a package implementation like an SAP, we might call those things, project preparation, business blueprinting, realization and final prep, and go live. So from this, 30,000 square foot view, you can map most methodologies into these basic activities. And as I said, it's okay if they overlap and things like that, but from that view, you certainly can map most of the methodologies that I've encountered. Now, why do you want to do this? Okay, well, it helps us decide what we want to include. Now, if we're estimating a new project and we're already at the end of, say, the what phase, then maybe we only want to include, the next 3 activities in our estimate, okay? Or if there's a separate group that does the deployment phase, maybe I only want to include the how and the do pieces in my estimate. So it helps you when you're estimating to figure out, what do I want to include? And if we're collecting historical data, it's useful to know, for the duration and the effort that we're collecting on these projects, what activities were included in that duration and effort. Because when we're making comparisons, if we've got a project that's reporting schedule and effort across all 4 of those activities, we don't want to compare that with a project that only, say, reported the construction and test activities. So it's useful when we're doing comparisons. We want to try and do apples-to-apples comparisons by comparing projects that had the same activities included in their schedule and effort numbers. And it's also useful when you're trying to compare different development methodologies, because we can see, if we map the phases, we can see if, going to Agile is having a positive impact and getting us to market faster and, bringing costs down and quality up, things like that. And the other thing is, by understanding the different methodologies we're applying estimation to within the enterprise, it helps us talk these people's language, and that we understand what you're doing. Because if we're trying to solicit information from them and we don't understand what they're doing and we can't talk their language, they're sure not going to put much faith in the estimates that we're generating. Okay, the next thing we need to deal with is application domains and project complexity. Not all software is the same. We found, again, that most software falls into 3 basic complexity zones. If you've got your business or IT types of software. That tends to be lower in complexity. Most of the business algorithms are mostly well known. Examples of that might be, financial services, enterprise resource planning, CRM, inventory management, things of that nature. The next level of complexity would be what I call the engineering class software. It's more complex, and typical types of things that would fall in this category would be like command and control, air traffic control systems, system software and operating systems, communications, cellular switching systems would fall into that area, scientific number crunching, process control, so running factories and power plants and things like that. And then probably your most complex types of software is going to be what I'll call the real-time world. So this is your firmware, embedded controllers, your avionics software. There's usually lots of constraints, either space or timing constraints. And when we say real-time here, we're talking hardware real-time, not human real-time. And in many cases, we're doing things that have never been done before. So it's important to understand the different complexity zones so that when we're collecting our historic data, we're collecting relevant historic data to support the types of projects that we have to estimate. And if we're doing benchmarking, we want to make sure that we're doing comparisons against similar types of projects. It wouldn't be valid to take a bunch of IT data and be comparing that against some engineering class benchmark data. Okay, so we need it to have an apples to apples sort of comparison that we're doing on the historic data that we've captured up. So important to understand that, important to build that into our configuration, which is exactly where we're going. So once we kind of have our data pulled together, we understand the different methodologies we're going to apply it to and the different types of software we're going to apply this to, then we go ahead and we configure our estimation solution. So either it might be spreadsheets that we're using within the organization, it might be commercial estimating tools like the QSM, SLIM, and web services tool set. It might be our detailed task planning tools, and it usually involves setting up work breakdown structures, resource allocations and roles. It usually deals with defining the scope metrics and the size metrics that we're going to use. And notice, that doesn't mean effort. Effort is an output of the estimation process. Size and scope is what we have to define, build, integrate, test, and deliver. And those scope metrics, as I said earlier, are generally going to be tied to the type of project and methodology that I'm applying it to. So if I'm applying it to a project that's using agile methods, I might be using user stories or story points as my sizing metrics. If I was going to be applying it to a package implementation, then I'm really going to be talking more high-level and detailed business processes and maybe RICE objects for the custom development portion. So we'll have to configure those sizing models in our estimation templates. And then obviously the productivity is going to come from a historic database. It's best if it comes from an organization's own internal database as a part of the benchmarking activity that we just talked about. But in some cases, if you don't have any relevant historical data or you want an independent view, you can use industry databases that are out there like the QSM historic database. And then we have to define what our decision-making products and deliverables are going to be, and who we're going to be, presenting that to, whether it's senior level management where we would just want to cut to the chase and give them the bottom line versus presenting to a project manager where we might have to go into a lot more details on the assumptions that went into developing the schedule and the cost estimates. Okay. So, in terms of the decision points where we want to put estimation, within the process. This is actually an artifact that I was using working with a client recently, and I thought this was a perfect example of kind of where we would pop the estimation decision points into their PMO quality gate process. So you notice that they start off with sort of an initiation phase. There are certain inputs that go into that, and notice that we've got some pretty high-level business requirements that are getting defined at that initiation phase. And that's where we would put our very first estimation. We call it a feasibility estimate, and really what it's designed to do is make sure that that the expectations of the business stakeholders in terms of what they're expecting from both a scope, a schedule, and a cost standpoint are in alignment with what the the development capabilities are of the organization. So we call that a feasibility estimate, and it's all about identifying high-risk proposals, hopefully before they get into the project stream. Next, as things get further refined into business process models and detailed requirements in the planning area, we can do a refined estimate. So here we've usually got better sizing metrics that we're working with. We may be doing alternatives analysis, whether we want to build this from scratch, do we want to implement a package, things like that, and looking at the costs and benefits of either one of those strategies. And then finally, just prior to execution, we're going to usually do a commitment estimate. So this is when we're going to have absolutely the best information available, and that's when we're going to get our best estimates. And usually that's what we're committing to. And then when we're into execution, we're tracking how we're performing against those plans. So it's both the project management information, the schedule and the effort expenditure, but we're also bringing some of the development metrics in to get a complete picture. So how is the product getting constructed in our testing activities? How many defects are we finding? And that allows us to quantify how well we're tracking against the plan. And if things change, and they do in many cases on software projects, we need the ability to be able to forecast into the future. At the end of execution, we've got a closeout activity. That's the ideal place to get our historic data pulled together. Now, even though I say historic data collection, if we're going through the tracking processes, we've got all this information. So there's really not a lot of collection that's happening. It's really just getting it into the repository and then maybe doing a very basic performance benchmark. How does this project perform? And then updating, the historic data that we're going to use for the next round of projects that are going to go through the PMO quality gate process. So this is a very nice illustration of where typical estimation points support other decision points on our projects. Okay. All right. Next, we're transitioning into the infrastructure and integrating it at the enterprise level. So as far as the estimation infrastructure, we've got to have an implementation strategy. So how are we going to deploy this in the organization? Is it going to be a centralized deployment? Are we going to go decentralized, where we want to train up every project manager that's out there? Do we want some sort of a hybrid, where we have a centralized group, but we also have broader awareness in the organization? So how are we going to implement, measurement and estimation? How are we going to collect the data? How are we going to store it and maintain the integrity of our metrics repository? Obviously, we've got to publish standards and publish our estimation templates that we've configured in the previous step. And then provide the linkages to the other processes, the portfolio, risk, project management processes that are in place. And to the degree that we can, automate these integrations, the better, because that will reduce resistance. If we can automate these things so that there's not a lot of manual either data entry or data collection, then that will reduce resistance as we deploy this. So generally, there's some enterprise management tools we're trying to integrate with. I'm going to show you an example of integrating with project and portfolio management tools, because there's tremendous opportunities there. There's usually business intelligence and reporting tools that are already in the organization. So the more that we can take our measurement and estimation analysis information and integrate that into existing reporting tools and get those on the existing dashboards that senior management or whoever is consuming that information is already looking at, again, it reduces resistance. Obviously, there's time and cost accounting, and the estimates can feed pricing systems within the organization as well. The other thing that we need to integrate with is the development tool. So this is more of a technical picture of projects and how they're performing. So the configuration management systems are generally providing our size and scope measures either after the fact or when we're in execution. The defect tracking systems are providing the defect information, so we can look at, how many did we create on this project, how many slipped through the net, when we went to deployment for a period of time, and when we're, in execution, how many are we finding, how stable is the product, and how do we project out when it's going to be stable enough to deploy. And obviously, the project management systems as well. So we can hand off top-down, high-level estimates and a detailed work breakdown structure to the detailed, project management systems that the project managers use to manage, their teams and the very detailed work activities that are going on. Okay, so I said there's a lot of opportunity with integrating estimation with project and portfolio management. Most of the enterprise PPM implementations require that all projects adhere to the established PPM processes, okay? So they're usually very expensive, both to procure and to implement. So these PPM integrations typically already have those senior level, mandates. All projects are going to go through them. We need to know all of the resources within the development organization and what those resources are working on. So projects usually start out as a proposal, an unapproved proposal in the PPM solutions, where they need to be aligned with the enterprise IT strategy. But they also generally will require a business case for approving those proposals. And the business case generally will have some costs and durations. Now, are those, expected costs? No, they're generally being driven by business stakeholder expectations. How long is the business stakeholder willing to wait for something, and how much are they willing to pay for it? There's usually some benefits that are identified in terms of when we have this capability, we're either going to be more efficient, or there's certain cost savings available from having it, and that gets fed into some sort of an ROI analysis, and there's usually some risks that are identified as part of that proposal process. So this is an ideal place to integrate those feasibility estimates. Usually, as I said earlier, the mandate is most likely already in place due to the PPM processes, so we're not levying an additional mandate, we're just inserting an estimation process into an already existing mandate that's there. And it's an ideal place to trap these high-risk proposals before they get into the project stream, and this is really where we're going to ensure that our stakeholder expectations are aligned with what our developer capability is. It's absolutely the best chance we're ever going to have to renegotiate cost, schedule, and scope. So there's tremendous value in integrating feasibility estimates with the PPM processes and the proposal development and approval processes, because that's where we're going to get the most leverage. Okay, what is required for a feasibility estimate? Well, your business stakeholder desired cost and schedule. That's usually not very hard to get. You're going to need something that measures the size and scope. And usually at this very early point, we're going to be dealing with high-level business requirements and or some sort of analogy-based sizing where we're comparing it to previous projects. And because we've already gone through the benchmarking activity at this point, we've got a base of statistical sized projects that we can use for doing that. And then we'll need expected productivity. So again, the benchmarking statistics will allow us to get that. Empirical productivity, either from our own data or from an applicable industry database. So 3 pieces of information backed up by historical data is all you really need to provide a credible estimate at this point in time. Okay, this is what it kind of looks like, and this is what we're trying to trap. So here we've got the desires for this claims rewrite project. We want it, the business stakeholder wants it in 8 months, and he's got $1 million budgeted for this. We run it through based on the size and scope and based on the productivity demonstrated by our development organization, and it looks like this is more like a 19-month project and maybe a $7 million project. So we see right now we've got a huge disconnect between expectations and what it's really going to take to pull this off. So now, we can start exploring alternatives. Can we prioritize the scope? Can we renegotiate the schedule? Can we, add a few people to the project, whatever it turns out to be. Notice that we can also back up by taking our benchmarking information for schedule and for effort. We generate our average trends through that, and then we can put those stakeholder expectations up against that benchmark data. And it very clearly highlights right now those expectations are what we would call in the impossible zone based on our data and our performance metrics. But we can start to explore, could we shift the size back this way, de-scope, and get something that could be done within that time frame and within that cost? Or, can we negotiate some more time? So usually having the data and doing this type of analysis will smoke out things that we absolutely don't want to sign up to approve. We don't want to approve this project and hand it off to a project manager knowing it's got a 1% chance he's going to be successful, okay? The other thing that we can do is we can make estimation support the resource planning. So we can look at, of the total effort, we can break out how much of that effort needs to be going into these different activities: requirements, architecture, design, development, test, and so on. So we can get sort of the overall amount of effort that will be required in these different areas, because these are different types of people that we need to bring to bear. And then if we can take that a step further and actually break that effort out into, when am I going to, how much effort in each of these roles am I going to need, and when am I going to need it? So if we can actually break that out, in this case we're looking at calendar months, we can see when do we need to be ramping on our requirements people, when do the architecture folks come in, when do our development and testing people come on and roll off, okay? Because this is really what is needed, the amount of granularity that's needed for the folks that need to do the resource planning. And they're usually doing that in their PM, or in this case, I've got a screenshot out of Clarity where they would actually go in and look at, for that type of resource, who is available and when are they available to support this type of a project. So very nice way that the estimation can support the resource planning. In many cases, this is a very manual process right now. So the more that we can automate this and provide this to the person that's doing this, that's a major leg up in time savings. Okay. The other thing, when we talk about integrating into the project management and QA execution area, most of the enterprise risk monitoring that I've seen go on around projects really revolves around cost and schedule performance. That's only half of the core metrics. It doesn't take into account how the product is getting produced and how stable the product is. So we're really missing half of the picture if we're just assessing project risk from a cost and a schedule standpoint. So, what we're going to advocate here is that we set up in project execution, we set up our metrics dashboard so that we have the traditional measures, so we know how we're staffing the project and how we're spending the money, and we've got our key schedule, tasks, and milestones that we're reviewing. But we also need the development measures. So how are the features getting constructed, and how many defects are we finding? What's the find and fix rate on the project? And that really gives you a much more comprehensive view of a project's health, because they can look fine from a cost and schedule standpoint. It's easy to check off the early milestones that basically are reviews, and you can staff and spend the money any way you want to in a project. That doesn't necessarily relate to how it's getting built and how stable it is. Okay, and notice that we've got, we're not going to be right on the plan during each time period each month, but we've got these little control bounds that say what's acceptable variation and what's not. Okay, and that's really what's driving our little health meters on the individual metrics. The other thing that this allows us to do is be able to project. So based on the performance measures that are coming off the project, we can then do an estimate to complete, from now to when the project is actually likely to finish up and how much it's actually likely to cost. And notice this is the demand for resources this project is going to continue to need, and we might have to circle back into the PPM solution to say, okay, well, we thought these people were going to be rolling off this project, but they're not. They're going to be staying on for an additional 4 months. That might ripple through some of the other projects that might be, the assumptions might be that they were going to get those people at these points in time. So very important information to have and feed back to the PPM solution and the resource planning folks. Okay. Okay, so now that's how you do it. Now how do you deploy something like this? And as I said earlier, you're usually going to start off with some pilot implementation. We want to limit the scope to something that we can get done and show results in a reasonably short period of time. Okay. We're not going to have a lot of time to get this thing off the ground and show results. So it's important that you find willing partners. So let's find some project teams that are embracing this and really want to do it. It'll allow us, as we go through the pilot, if there are things that aren't working so well, it'll allow us to fine-tune those processes before we go for enterprise-wide deployment. And we want to document the results and, more importantly, the successes that we had in the pilot, because that's going to help us in creating, in the adoption, where we're creating awareness for the different business stakeholders. We're going to advertise those pilot results and successes and say this is what's in it for you and why you should jump on board. The other thing we're going to do is have to provide training and education. So we're conduct, senior level seminars for the management folks, so they're on board. We've obviously got to train the Center of Excellence staff. That's going to be our back office estimation experts, and provide that ongoing mentoring and advice as they encounter things that they haven't encountered before. They need resources that they can refer back to help them out until they're 100% ramped up. And then the continuous improvement piece. So this is, how do we, refine it and make it better as we go along. So we need the lessons learned and feedback loops. So there's things we can do in terms of surveys to the different stakeholders. We can interview different groups after we've deployed to find out what, their take is on how it went and what they'd like to see. And, sometimes suggestion boxes are useful from an anonymous feedback sort of standpoint. Obviously, we'll adjust our tooling and processes and products as needed, as new things are coming in, or as we gather more data and we see that things are changing. We'll have to adapt our estimation processes to account for that. And the key thing here is strive for continuous improvement. Huge to document your successes, because every year we're going to have to go back to the well for the investment money to keep it going. So we've got to have those successes and risk avoidance and business case numbers to do that, okay? And we've got to continue to collect the data. So this keeps our estimation assumptions up to date, and it helps confirm both our initial and future business cases of the benefits that we're going to provide the organization. This data helps bear that out, that we actually are getting the benefits that we're promising. Okay, so stakeholder benefits that you're going to get out of this at the senior level. They're going to get performance benchmarks and dashboards and see how their organization is performing. They're going to get strategic, program risk assessments, portfolio performance optimization, and resource optimization within their IT or within their development group. The project managers, they're going to get realistic schedules and budgets and be able to do resource optimization. This is going to provide them with some very good negotiation tools if they're being asked to operate down in that impossible zone, and allows them very easily to do a risk assessment and show what the probability is if we proceed down this path. The business stakeholders, they get transparency in the process, and they get more of a partner type relationship with the development organization. And if we're want to use this in an acquisition mode, then it's really providing us some insight into what our suppliers' capabilities are, what their quantitative performance is, and being able to assess, with the bids that we're looking at, are we getting the best price and value that we should be getting from our suppliers, okay? All right, let me just wrap up. In terms of documenting the benefits, this is an example of a customer prior to implementing a Center of Excellence and estimation processes. Things were pretty bad. High percentage of their projects were over budget and over schedule, to the tune of maybe $14 million. Within the first year, so think of this as maybe the pilot of implementing these, they had cut that down substantially, almost in half, big reduction in cost overruns and schedule slippages, and by full COE implementation in year 3, again, huge progress. So this type of savings and improvement is what you use to justify your investments in the COE. These are some specific, customers. These are sort of the issues that we were running in with. You'll see that there's some, I'm not going to go through and read each of these because the slides will be available. You can go through them on their own, but you'll see that there's some consistency in the challenges. No standard estimation processes. They were having problems in meeting their commitments. They implemented most of what we're just talking about here, either through bringing in an external organization like QSM to help them stand it up, or in some cases, they stood it up on their own, and then these are the kind of benefits that they were able to derive out of it. So, rebaselining out-of-scope projects down by 90%. Again, capturing these successes is critical to keeping it going. So this is a, big logistics company, a large IT service company. We're having problems meeting their margin. They implemented their estimation center of excellence. They trained up. This is a company that used more of a hybrid solution. They had a centralized center of excellence, but they trained up over 2,000 people across their organization in estimation as well. And this company is just excellent at being able to capture their historic data, to populate their repository, localize that data for the different estimation regions and areas, and then very good at documenting their improvements. So, in one example alone, they were able to demonstrate a savings of $11 million, on one particular project that they employed it on. Again, a large insurance company, again, challenges that they faced, implemented a COE and the processes that we talked about, and then this is the type of accuracy that they were able to achieve within a relatively short period of time. Large international bank, again, if you read through them, you'll see that the challenges are very similar, and implementing the COE capabilities. This customer actually did a very nice job in implementing a simple-to-use spreadsheet front end, because they were used to using spreadsheets at this organization, so he implemented a very simple spreadsheet that gathered the input assumptions that they needed to feed back to the estimation solution, and then presented the results, again, back in a simple spreadsheet-type format. So just by doing things like that helped him get adoption among the business stakeholder community. Again, very good results in terms of accuracy, savings, cost avoidance, things of that nature. So how can QSM help you stand up something like this? Well, we've got a very robust set of technology that we've developed. Everything from the slim desktop suite that is, very configurable in terms of the types of projects that you can apply it to, very easy to calibrate with historic data, all the way up to our web services product, which is designed to be an easy, widely deployed, easy to use product that supports more of your occasional users in the organization. The desktop is designed for more of the power users, back office, COE staff. And then we've also got the training, product support, and research available, as well as a world-class consulting division that can come in and help you implement something like this in as short a period of time as possible to get you, to significantly decrease the time to value in standing something like this up. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it back over to Elizabeth. We'll try and field a couple questions in the few minutes that we have left. And if I don't get to them, she's going to have, we've got the contact information up there. Please send those to us, and we'll get to them afterwards.
Great. And we actually have quite a few good questions, but, we'll try and keep this within the hour we have allotted. And just to make everybody aware, we will have a replay available, and the slides will be available for download. So I'll send out a link as soon as that's available, and if you came in late, you'll be able to catch up. So just to start, how do you handle estimating change requests, like, scope creep? Do you estimate the entire project again, or do you just estimate the impact of the change request?
Great question. It would depend on where we were in the project life cycle. If we were still fairly early on, back maybe in our if you think back on that diagram I had earlier, where we're at somewhere between the feasibility assessment and the refined estimate, if we were back at that point in time, I probably would add those into my sizing assumptions and re-estimate the project. Now, if I'm already farther along and I'm into, say, execution, and I get changes when I'm already into constructing the system, then what I'm probably going to use is I'm going to use my adaptive forecasting. I'm going to add those. I'm going to add those in, but within the context of everything else that I've got to build as part of the deliverable release, and that'll show me if I'm going to add these 5 additional features. And again, it depends on where you are. If we're already into, we've got everything integrated and we're already into testing, there'll be a bigger impact on being able to put those things in than if I'm, fairly early on and I haven't got a lot of stuff constructed. But we've got some capabilities that we can use to be able to forecast what the impact is going to be. Does that mean it's an additional month, or is it an additional 3 months? Again, depending on where we introduce those additional requirements, and what is that going to do to the cost, and even the defect projections going forward. So it's really depending on where we are in the process and how big of an impact it's going to have to us.
Okay. Should the Center of Excellence estimate all projects regardless of size, or if the project is small, then should the project teams estimate it?
That's a great question. I would say most organizations that set these up, they will have some minimum cutoff on project size, however they define that, whether that's in terms of duration, whether it's in terms of scope, whether it's in terms of cost. There will be some things that may be below the threshold of wanting to go through a formal top-down, estimation process. So it's very common to see that. Now, where those thresholds get set, I would say, is very much a function of the organization and the type of work that they do. Yeah, generally there'll be some cost-benefit analysis that they'll do to figure out at what level do we, can our teams estimate stuff that's only going to take 2 or 3 weeks to do versus, this is a 6 or 9 month project. It needs to go through the formal estimation process because there's a lot of risk on an investment of that size. So yeah, great question.
I think we have time for just one more, so I'll just do a quick one. How long does it take to set up an estimation center of excellence?
It depends. Generally, with some outside expert support, we can usually stand one of these up, at least to the pilot stage within, say, 3 to 6 months. It takes a certain amount of time to go through that benchmarking activity. So usually 3 to 6 months, to get to the initial pilot is something that's reasonable. Again, with the support of an expert organization that has a lot of experience doing this and setting something like this up. That's kind of what my experience has been from working with clients and actually doing this in the past.
Great. Well, I think this brings us to exactly an hour. And once again, thank you, Larry, for this presentation. And we'll have a replay available and slides for anyone that didn't catch the beginning or if you want to share it with anybody else. So I'll send out that link probably early next week. And please feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.